We've all seen where Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has built a brand of his Terramana tequila that's worth now over $2 billion, and the brand's only like 4 years old. We've seen where George Clooney has made $600 million or so with his tequila company, and Ryan Reynolds sold his gin company for $600 million, and Conor McGregor sold his Irish whiskey brand for something like $400 million that he made off that. These are crazy numbers. Well, my guest today, Christopher Pellegrini, is working to bring two Japanese spirits that really are not known in America, and honestly, they're not even as well known in Japan as you would think, bring those to the American market. It is a category and a class that could absolutely explode, and he is quite potentially on the verge of something huge. He's going to talk about that today, talk about Japanese spirits, and it's kind of fun to learn how they're made, what they are, what they taste like, but most importantly, the entrepreneurial journey that he's on and the obstacles that are in his way that he refuses to let be in his way. He is just an awesome personality, just a super cool dude. So you're going to have fun in this episode, but you'll learn a lot as well. And most importantly, there's some great little nuggets that he shares along the way. Enjoy. On today's episode of the ThriveMore podcast, I have a guest calling in from a place I've never had a guest call in from, and we're going to talk about something we've never talked about. So my guest today is Christopher Pellegrini, and Christopher is a Shochu and Awamori expert, and we're going to talk about what that is. And I got the pronunciations pretty close right there, but he'll help us with that. He's an author, a podcast host, and a die-hard Tokyo Swallows fan. He's calling in from Japan today. So he incorporates his infectious enthusiasm and knowledge of Japanese spirits in all his professional endeavors, and he's launched Honkaku Spirits in March of 2020 with the mission of bringing intensely artisanal Japanese spirits to discerning American consumers, especially Koji-based spirits, including Shochu, Awamori, or Awamori, and Koji whiskey. And again, he's going to help us with these pronunciations. After honing his skills as a brewer at Otter Creek Brewing Company in Middlebury, Vermont, Christopher became a full-time professor at Waseda University in Tokyo, Japan. Following the launch of Honkaku Spirits, he now lectures at the university on a part-time basis. But his big play is to bring these spirits to America, like bring a new category to America, which I just have so much respect for. We talk about entrepreneurship on this show. This dude is doing it. So with that being said, Christopher, welcome to the ThriveMore podcast.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh my gosh, pleasure to have you on. This is going to be fun. I'm enthralled with the spirits industry, probably because I've watched Sammy Hagar and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and George Clooney and Ryan Reynolds, Conor McGregor just make an ungodly amount of money by, really getting behind a brand.
Right.
And these brands are incredibly valuable. So I've just found the marketplace enthralling. But I would love to know, can we go back though, before we start down this road and what you're trying to bring to America and this category you're working to establish? Let's just start with, like, you lived in Japan, or you have lived in Japan for 2 decades. How and why, and how did that all come to be?
I followed a girl.
I love it. So that's how many stories start, right?
It was really that simple. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I lived in Spain for a while, assembled a couple of degrees, and then ended up in Korea very much on a whim. Boy meets girl. Girl hates her job in finance. Can't move back home because girl's father will kill girl's boyfriend if they ever cross paths. And so she's like, well, I like where this is heading with us, so why don't we just get outside of my father's zip code? And so she was like, I always wanted to live in Japan. And I said, I would love to see you as the foreigner in this relationship, or at least a foreigner like me, And so we moved to Japan together in late 2002. And that was the beginning of just a wonderful kind of tumble dry way of figuring out who we were as a team in a foreign environment. And it worked out. We got married. We're together to this day. It
Oh,
was,
that's great.
high risk, high reward. Everybody hears me start that story like, there's no way he's still with her.
Me too. Me too. I was waiting like,
Yeah.
how'd that turn out? Yeah. So you make this move in 2002 to Japan. Did you speak the language? Did she speak the language?
Yes, she had all of the levers in her favor. She had taught herself Japanese when she was in college, worked at the Japanese consulate in Busan, and was, for all intents and purposes, I mean, honestly, and I saw this with my own eyes, when we first moved over here, she could to speak Japanese to people, and it would take them 5 or 6 minutes of continuous conversation to figure out, especially after they heard her name, that she wasn't Japanese. So she was at such a level that, and this was, of course, very, very helpful to me. As independent as I am. It made my sort of figuring out where I am and getting my feet under myself a little bit easier. But I was kind of a professional foreigner at that point, because I had lived in Spain. And then I figured out how to survive in just a tiny city, not a tiny city, medium-sized city by American standards in South Korea, and then followed her to the biggest city I've ever lived in my life. I grew up in Bristol, Vermont, 2,200 folks, and now I'm in a city of 24 million. But when I got here, I was ready for it because I had already lived in Spain and South Korea, and there was so much I had learned and been humbled by through those experiences. The culture shock was very, very real throughout that. But when I got here, I knew that, number one, I'm not going to understand most of this, and that's cool. Number two, I can't change anything. There's nothing I can do or say that's going to change the way that this works. And that was fine with me too. Number three, I have to adjust and adapt. I don't have to necessarily like it or accept it, but I have to at least recognize how it works and try to fit in. Otherwise, it just creates all sorts of misery. It turns out that I did that way faster and way more completely than my now wife did, who, despite learning the language, was hit with all of this culture shock. She had never lived outside of Busan before. And so it was rough for her. And it nearly didn't work out a couple of times, but we stuck with it. And here we are today. We're both better off for it.
Oh, that's a great story. I'll share just very quickly. I when I was getting my MBA, I took an international business class, and my instructor was from Ghana. I was going to school in the state of Georgia at the time, but my instructor, and it's so funny how people will say something that they've probably forgotten they said it, but it just sticks with you. And we were going to go to Belgium, France, and England to go visit like 3 companies in each of those countries. To just learn about international business and how they do business and the culture differences and all that. It was a wonderful experience. You study international business and those companies almost the whole semester. At the end of the semester, you go on this trip, this 12-day trip. But I remember this we're in the South and everybody's proud Americans. And he was from Ghana, and he said, I just want one promise when we go over there. And some of you've traveled international, some of you haven't. But when we go over there, I want you to experience it as it's different, but not better or worse. It's just different. Just always keep in the forefront of your mind, hey, the way they do this, or the way this culture, or the way they eat, or their food, or their approach is different. But it's not a judgmental thing to say it's better or worse. It's just different. And that has served me so well on all the rest of my international travel, so that you can really acclimate kind of what you're talking about. You can't change it. Why are we fighting it? You can't change this. So
no, it doesn't. Your comments, your knee-jerk reactions to anything mean nothing. They mean less than nothing. And if anything, especially, because we experience culture shock when we join a new company. We experience culture shock when we move to a new town in the same state. Yeah. It's going to happen. And you are going to naturally, as a human being, have reactions to certain stimuli. Some of those you can see and sense and smell, and others you can't. They're just cultural differences that are going to affect you deeply. And this happens in companies when you join a new organization. We've all dealt with it, but you have to take a step back. And if you're going to be successful, and this is just a life lesson, you have to understand how these things are affecting you. And if you can identify how that's happening, breathe and acknowledge that, this is affecting me in a certain way. I don't normally act this way. That's fine. you're ahead of the curve. You're gonna make it.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
dwell in that stuff and you let it eat you up, you get spit out real quick, and you're going to be way less successful than you could have been if you had just taken a moment to think.
Listeners, that is a business lesson and a life lesson. Like that is
Absolutely.
equally
I believe
applicable
so.
to business and life. All right. So, Christopher, how did you get interested in Japanese spirits? And again, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. Shochu and Awamori. I think I got close there, but please.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
just as a gift to everybody out there, Japanese, the language, impossible to learn to read and write, but to pronounce correctly is not actually that hard. There are 5 vowel sounds: A, E, I, O, U. They have one pronunciation each, which is a blessing compared to English.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, all the different ways we can pronounce E and A, think about it. In Japanese, A, just pronounce them like they're Spanish or Italian, whichever, choose whichever one. A is A, E is E, I is E, O is U, and U is U. Just pronounce those faithfully, and you're 90% of the way there. The other 10% is not speaking too quickly and keeping everything relatively flat. It's what we would call a stress time language, which is basically everything gets kind of punctuated the same way. Nothing's punched, as opposed to English, which really does have a lot of inflection, a lot of emotion that goes into it, and you don't need that. But Shochu and Awamori are basically what I'm obsessed with. I have been interested in them since I arrived here in 2002. And to rewind a little bit, I got into beverage alcohol, not spirits, but beer back when I was a kid. I was a teenager. And as the result of a U.S. history class where my particular group was assigned the era of Prohibition, and we had to create or recreate a newspaper faithful to the advertising, the editorial style, all of the news and hubbub of that time. So we ended up I ended up in the library at Middlebury College in Middlebury, Vermont, great university, pouring through microfiche. If you don't know what that is, then, no
Google
comment. Google it. But learning all about what's going on and, taking, clipping advertisements for iron stoves and all of these things. And it turns out that during Prohibition, a lot of folks were making their own hooch at home. And so 16-year-old me and one of my closest friends, Jesse, we were in the same group. I don't know who thought it was wise to put us in the same group, but we were like, well, folks are making booze at home. How do you do that? So we diverted our attention to learning how to make alcohol at home, which quickly led us to winemaking, which turns out to be not that complicated on at face value. And then we got into beer. We were both beer guys. I know statute of limitations is expired.
Sure. Yeah, but you're good.
We started studying how to homebrew. Charlie Papazian had put out a couple of phenomenal homebrewing books, which we acquired. And it turns out that successful homebrewing is all about cleanliness. We're like, we can do that. We can keep things clean. We can do this. And so we started a little homebrewing operation called Last Call Brewing. We had our own labels and everything. And in the matter of over the course of about 2 years as a high school kid, I turned into one of the most insufferable beer snobs you've ever met in your life. And you could not talk to me about beer because I was making some okay beer at home.
Yeah.
It was bubbling away in my bedroom closet. And the reason we were able to do this because my mother is a deacon in the Episcopal Church. My father was a very, very faithful husband. They would disappear every Sunday for like 6 hours. So I had the kitchen and we made a batch every week. And that was the beginning of most of my lifelong obsession with high quality, handmade, batch produced beverage alcohol. It started with beer. It's now in spirits. And I just was obsessed with it. And I am to this day. So it's kind of been this very, very clear, thick thread throughout my entire life's journey. And it started at 4080th Street in Vermont, So.
Wow. This segment is sponsored by Rockbox Fitness Franchising. Take control of your destiny and join the boutique fitness revolution with Rockbox Fitness. If you're ready to make a real impact in your community and own your own business that empowers people to achieve their best life, then Rockbox is the opportunity you've been looking for. They provide comprehensive support from site selection, upfit, training, and turnkey marketing, so you can open your studio with confidence and a strong recurring revenue member base. Visit rockboxfitness.com and click on franchise opportunities to learn more about this exciting venture in the fast-growing boutique fitness industry. It's time to turn your passion for fitness and for business into a thriving venture. You show up in Japan, you move to Japan, you start to try some of the different local spirits, I guess, or how did, I shouldn't put words in your mouth. How did you get from, I moved to Japan to, damn, I'm really passionate about this new category of spirits to meet new to you, you know?
Well, fortunately, I had a vessel for getting to Japan. I was in education, and I had taught in the States, and then I ended up didn't really jive with me, and I ended up in Korea and moved in down the street from my future wife. She befriended one of my colleagues at the school, and then the rest is kind of history. But she wanted to move here. I moved here with her. I thought we were going to be here for 1 year. I took great pleasure in finally having access to good sake, because in the 90s in America, that stuff was garbage. I mean, nobody knew how to handle it. People treated sake in America like it was a spirit. They would open the bottle and then just leave it on the shelf for months and then pour for the next customer. It was like vinegar. We called it dirty socks. But I got to Japan and in 2002 and was delighted to find that that was all just wrong. And I spent a couple of months just slowly plowing through what I could find. And then one day, while I was at it's called an izakaya, Izakaya, which is a Japanese gastropub. Basically, it's a bar that does food reasonably well. Mm-hmm. And they're everywhere. Izakaya are just like the name of the game over here. And it was very sake-centric, but unbeknownst to me, the guy had several shochu behind the counter, and it was raining, so I was the only guy in there. So he's like, let's mess with the gringo. And he put out a couple of shochu in front of me for the first time in my life. I had never heard of the category before. Yeah. And it just ruptured my entire life's path. I was shocked. I was like, this is not sake. And I didn't speak any Japanese at that time either. What is this? And he's like, it's shochu. And I had lived in Korea for 2 years. So I was like, I know what soju is, SOJU. Is this soju? He's like, no, completely different. I was like, okay. So what are we talking about here? He's like, it's shochu, try it. And I tried a barley shochu. I was like, wow, that's really interesting. He's like, oh, you don't hate it. Let's find something that you're not going to like. So he turned around and he brought me a sweet potato shochu, which is just like off the charts, different planet, both clear as water. But so I wasn't ready for it. Yeah. And I smelled it and I protested. I was like, there's no way that's shochu. If the first one's shochu, that's not shochu. They were so radically different. It really almost upset me because I was like, okay, I understand this is a joke. It's almost like he put Malort in front of me after giving me like a glass of Chardonnay. It was that different. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then he gave me a buckwheat shochu, and he gave me a rice shochu, and he gave me a kokuto sugar shochu. All clear as water, all completely different.
What are they? Because I was thinking that they were all rice-based spirits, but that's not the case, because you just said sweet potato, you said barley, you said rice. What is shochu?
Shochu is the most diverse spirit on the planet. It can be made from, by Japanese tax law, 53 approved ingredients and their Koji. And while sake, Japan's most famous export, at least in whiskey's now very famous too, but historically the most famous thing in terms of alcohol that was exported from Japan, that's always made from rice and only rice. Yeah. Rice is also an approved ingredient for shochu, but it's one of many.
Okay.
And so the most popular two styles in Japan are barley and sweet potato.
Okay.
And number 3 is rice. Number 4, I think by sales volume, is probably buckwheat. And then there's sesame shochu, there's kokuto sugar shochu, there's some weirdos like water chestnut shochu, kelp, cactus, all sorts of things that are regional agricultural products. No fruit, really, but grains, tubers, leaves, and everything in between. And because there's no...
What connects them? What connects them into that one category?
Okay, so the aside from the restrictions on ingredients, well, there's more restrictions, but one of them is they must be made with koji, fermented with koji. Koji is Japan. This is incredibly sexy, so wait for it. Japan's national mold.
Okay.
Now, the beautiful thing about this is that without this mold, Japanese cuisine as we know it would be unrecognizable. So this mold, Koji, K-O-J-I, is used to make soy sauce, miso, 100% of sake, mirin, 100% of shochu, awamori, pretty much all the other spirits in the country with the exception of most whiskey. Everything delicious that's made in Japan and fermented pretty much is made with Koji. So it is the magic behind the savory umami notes of Japanese cuisine. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why they can focus so much on individual ingredient by ingredient, because they have this magic savory note that they can add to things. It is an underappreciated aspect of Japanese cuisine that now, fortunately, chefs around the world are starting to use it in their menus. So you're starting to see Koji everywhere. And that's made it a lot easier to talk about it. It is a mold. It's a filamentous mold that is completely harmless and very tasty, and does very fast-acting starch conversion and helps to create very efficient fermentations if you're talking about beverage alcohol. And it's used to make 100% of shochu and awamori.
Gotcha.
And now, that's one of the requirements. That's one of the required ingredients in addition to those 53 I mentioned before. A couple of other things. You start a fermentation. So let's just imagine a rice fermentation. Mm-hmm. The starch conversion is not malted grains. It has to be this kojified, this mold propagated on the rice. So it takes the place of malted grains like in whiskey and beer. Mm-hmm. And then whatever you have from that fermentation, you distill one time in a pot still, which is incredibly rare. And then you can't add any additives ever. There's no additives allowed. It's just approved ingredients and their koji, water, yeast, and time. That's it. T-I-M-E, not T-H-Y-M-E. And that's pretty much it. It's on paper, very simple. In reality, very hard to do well.
Sure. And then how is, before we get into the business of this, which is really will be the meat and potatoes, Awamori, what is that and how is that different?
Awamori is shochu's aunt. It's several generations older. Was started in Okinawa Prefecture, which is as far southwest in Japan as you can get before you hit Taiwan. And it's a rice spirit, always rice. Even people in Japan don't realize that. They think it's made from sugarcane. It's not. It never is. It's not allowed. It's rice with black koji. It's one specific strain that is indigenous to the southern islands called Koji, literal translation, black koji. Single pot distilled, like shochu, no additives. Tends to be very vegetal, mineral forward, a little bit of a good mushroom quotient to it. They will cut it 50-50 with mineral water, pour it over ice, and drink a lot of it with dinner.
Yeah.
Kind of like a wine, almost.
What proof, give or take? Like we think in America, a whiskey is like 80 proof, right? So that's about 40% alcohol by volume. Yep. Wine is usually, I think, 12 to 16%, give or take. Beer's like 4 to 8. What are these spirits from an alcohol content perspective?
Max allowable level by Japanese tax law is 90 proof. And that's actually, it has to be under 90 proof. So under 45% is the max allowable ABV. Now, most shochu, anyway, is bottled at 25 because until relatively recently, historically, the tax would bump up at 26% ABV. So everybody bottled at 25. And even after they eased that, they kind of they discontinued that tax bump. Still, to this day, everybody just drinks 25. And Awamori is typically bottled at 30, but higher proof expressions are not uncommon, especially today as people are getting more into the craft aspect of these drinks. So 43, 44 is not uncommon. But, the higher you go, the more tax is added. So a lot of it is at 25. And it works really well there. I don't know if the tax authorities were really thinking about how nice it tasted, but 25 tends to work. So it's not horrible.
Yeah, which is great. So you can sip it and enjoy a couple of them.
It worked out.
All right. So in my research, I found really you're essentially trying to establish this new spirits category in the U.S.
Yeah.
I would love to know, one, how that's going, but just what is involved in that, because that seems to be a Herculean task, although I just have mad respect for the fact that you're working towards this. So talk to us about what's involved in doing that.
It's a lot of education, honestly.
Yeah.
It's just education from morning to night. And fortunately, that's what I love to do. Yeah. And I hope that I'm doing that for the rest of my life, quite honestly. I don't think I've ever said that before on camera, but I do honestly hope that I am traveling around the world, just tasting people through interesting things from Japan that are all made with Koji, and that this becomes a standard spirit, just like gin, just like mezcal, just like behind the bar, there's going to be shochu. That's my dream. And it is basically, it's 100% education. I spend this year, by the end of November, I will have spent 5 months and I'll have spent more than 170 days living out of a suitcase in hotels in the United States alone. And I just get on the road and I set up tastings and staff trainings. I travel around working with our distribution partners. You said Herculean. It takes an army, and that's what we're trying to build. Actually, one of my focuses is on getting like-minded folks to really buy into this. And it's early, so there's not so many of us, but there are folks that are extremely passionate about it. And they are doing just as much of the work as I am, if not more. And so I travel around trying to assist them, doing events. But it's very early days. I mean, we're still at the point where folks can't tell the difference between Korean soju and Japanese shochu. I know that they rhyme, but they're so radically different that it's insulting to both cultures to conflate them. But, we're not there yet. But it's, we are trying to establish a category. It's going to work. It's just going to take a lot more time.
Yeah, well, you've got a vision. I mean, give me an entrepreneur with a vision, the rest will follow. But if you believe in that and you manifest that, I'm such a big believer in just get your vision right and the things will fall in line behind that. So is it fair to say, Christopher, I can only imagine there's legal issues, there's tax laws, there's import laws. What has that been like going through trying to get foreign alcohol into the United States of America?
If it's a spirit, I gotta say it's one of the trickier things you can try to do. If it's just a wine, if it's a beer, if it's sake, which all fall under a different class, it's a lot easier. But as soon as you involve a still, distillation is involved, all of a sudden you're the devil, and everything that you're trying to push on people is the devil's spawn. So it's really tough because America still has this post-prohibition level breaks on everything. And regulatory wise, there's all these things in place that are designed to level the playing field, but in fact do not. And what they do is they do a great job of keeping small businesses non-competitive, really.
Of course.
That's probably slightly, I'm exaggerating only to the slightest degree. It is very challenging because the big players can just budget for fines. That's part of their business model. So they're going to break the rules anyway. So the rules don't actually help all that much. What would be much easier, what would be much more helpful is if, for instance, my business could use Instagram to encourage people to go to an event that we are sponsoring at one of our accounts, but legally we can't do that.
Yeah.
We can't use Instagram to talk about a way that we're trying to spread this Japanese aspect of Japanese culture to a new audience. Like, I can't use the official Honkaku Spirits account. It's kind of dumb, and it handcuffs us, and it makes us. We have to find other ways. I mean, there's challenges everywhere. I mean, if you're an entrepreneur, I mean, this is breakfast. There's going to be. This is just, you're going to wake up and it's like this all the time. And if you don't love that, if that doesn't make you smile, then go do something else, because this is just what it is. And it's awesome because this is so cliched because I've heard it so many times. I'm sure you've heard it on this podcast. You probably say it yourself. If it was easy, then everyone would do it. Well, let me tell you, trying to deal with American administrivia related to foreign imported spirits. Wow. We might as well be importing nuclear weapons. I swear it is. The regulatory side of it is really onerous.
And so who are you, I can only imagine. And so who are you targeting? I guess, obviously the consumer, but you've got to go, I would think, and my understanding of most smaller beer, wine, and or spirit manufacturers are going to use distributors because the market is just so fractionated and just
legally
huge.
We have to. Yeah.
You have to. Oh, okay. You have to. Okay.
Yeah.
And then,
I
so
keep saying Japan.
Yep.
But
so you're working with U.S. distributors, and then it's educating them so that they then will get you these tastings and these events with staff so that you can really educate the people that are one step away from the consumer.
So America has what's called the 3-tiered system, which, again, was an old law that prevents the same player from having their fingers in all the pies at the same time. So you can't be a producer, importer, and simultaneously a distributor, and simultaneously also control restaurants and bars. They make that illegal. In Japan, you can do that without any issue. So I have a separate business in Japan. I like my alcohol license in Japan. I can pretty much sell alcohol anywhere at any time to anyone, with the exception of an elementary school cafeteria. And actually, I could probably do it there too if I planned it out right. Now now thinking about it, there really are almost no restrictions. Whereas in the States, it's the 3-tiered system. We're a supplier, importer. We can only sell to a distributor. We have to use distributors. They are the ones who sell to our actual customers on premise, off premise, and they sell to the end user.
Okay.
Think about how many times a margin is taken there.
Wow.
So there's a lot of people getting paid, and the end user, the consumers, are not benefiting from that at all, because the power player in the middle, which is the distributor, they can decide who makes it to market and who doesn't. So
I get it. No, I get it. I've talked to, I was at a local brewery. This is 4 years ago, and was talking to somebody that had about getting their beer into supermarkets and into other restaurants and all that, and they have to go through a distributor. And I think they were using whoever is Corona, or was representing Corona in North Carolina, and just talking about the hoops that they have to jump through and all that, and just not, like they said, bar none, the most profitable beer I can pour is right here in our brewery. After that, I make very, very low margin on anything going out. Yeah.
Producers in the States have certain liberties within their home state. They can sort of flout the 3-tiered system, which is great. But as soon as you have bigger ambitions, it gets real tricky real fast. And the beer market is a tough market.
Yeah. It's hyper competitive.
There's so much good beer everywhere you go. Yep. And American spirits, the craft spirits market in America has really turned into something that looks like it could turn into the craft beer market from 15 years ago. There's so many great craft distilleries everywhere you go. It's really tough. Finding distribution is one thing, but then the worst thing is that most of these distributors are huge. They have portfolios with thousands of brands. And so you're going to get ignored. And there's nothing worse than getting ignored. Like that's how brands get destroyed. Not because there's antipathy. That's not because the distributor dislikes the brand. It's because they've got too much going on. So they forget about it. And that's how brands die. It's a really hyper competitive market in most of the United States. And it's not for the faint of heart.
You're fighting for attention. I mean, you're literally, that's the new economy is attention, and your business is no different. Let's talk about, just pivot here real quickly.
Okay.
And we'll, at the end, we're going to bring it full circle so people can find out how to follow you and how to actually find this. What have you experienced? You're an American that has then now lived abroad in 3 countries. What is your experience in doing business in foreign countries, and, best practice for the listeners?
Yeah. It's been humbling. It's been very educational. We deal with, so I'm a co-owner of a business in Fukuoka, Japan, which is in the beverage alcohol trade internationally. And then another business called Honkaku Spirits, which is based in New York. We have an office. I've never visited it. That's a secret. But apparently there's a desk and a phone and a lot of my mail. But anyways, they are friends. They are not the same business, but they work together. Now we have a team that is US based. We have a team that's Japan based, and they're constantly working. They're best friends. They depend on each other for survival. And I'm one of the go-betweens to sort of help translate the cultural differences, and to, they're always like, well, why can't they just do this? And I'm like, I usually just bite my tongue. Well, why do they do it that way? Why? Well, we should just ask. I'm like, and so one of my favorite things about, I use this example all the time, so I apologize if you've heard it before, because maybe other people say this, but there's this thing in especially American business where there's kind of the punctuation on a lot of discussions is, well, it doesn't hurt to ask. And that is so much the antithesis to consensus building, community cohesion, trust over here. That it really can hurt to ask. We've already had these discussions. It took 9 months, and the US side was pissed that it took so long. But we agreed to these things. This is the way we're going to do this, the way that everybody understands everything. Everybody signed off on everything. And now the Japanese side has the confidence to move forward with everything because it's all been approved. And we paid special attention to every single last detail. And for the side over there to suddenly go like, well, so things have changed on the ground. We need this concession. We need to ask them about, is this possible? Whew. That can ruffle some feathers, and it can degrade trust. And so I'm often one of the filters, if not a wall, to those sorts of queries, to try to make sure that it doesn't make it through to the other side, because you can just derail things and harm the long-term future of the relation, or at least the medium-term future of the relationship. So language barriers notwithstanding.
Yeah, the Japanese way of doing business, from my understanding, very limited understanding, is it's at a very measured pace, and it kind of culminates in, okay, let's move forward, versus kind of the American, how fast can we get to a decision? Yes or no, but let's go.
Consensus building, yes.
It's consistent, right. and respect. You're 100% correct. Huge. Yeah. Yep.
And
I've read some biographies and different things. Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Yep. That's 100% correct. So you actually have a book now called, titled The Shochu Handbook. That's kind of that is an introductory guide. Why write that? Is this to, again, that education part that you talked about earlier? Yes, I mean, when I first got into shochu back in the day, 20 something years ago, and I started flying south to the major distillation zone in Japan, which is Kyushu, Okinawa, and started making friends, started actually finding a real reason to learn Japanese. And I kind of fell in love with the families that had been making these spirits for, over 100 years.
Yeah.
And, they were like 5th generation, 6th generation. You can, the family tree going back is just like everybody worked in the distillery, and they're still doing it the same way that their great granddaddy and grandmother made it. And they're making it not because they have visions of grandeur. It's not like we're going to sell this in Paris. They're thinking we're going to sell this to our neighbors, and our neighbors depend on us to make this beautiful, simple product the same way that it's been made for generations. And that's what we do. And as someone who worked on a brewery floor for, I ended up becoming the youngest commercial beer brewer in the United States when I was a teenager, just pure fluke.
Yeah.
But I was too young to drink what I was making legally.
Sure.
But I ended up in Japan, and I was able to walk into these places. I didn't necessarily at first understand how they made it because it was so radically different from a malt-based fermentation in the West. But I respected the grit, and I respected the time, and I respected the consistency that was required to create products that people would line up for. And that's something that I fell in love with as a kid in Vermont. And I saw it again in Japan, in southern Japan. And then I got to know these people, and then I fell even more in love with it. And then I got to this point where I just thought, I need to help them spread word about this, because I can't believe it's such a localized thing. Now, Shochu and Awamori, this is not hyperbole, are Japan's best kept secret. There is more shochu consumed in Japan every year than sake.
Oh my gosh.
That's been true every year since 2003. And most folks in Japan don't even realize how true that is. Now, to give you an idea of how big this industry is, the last year that I have numbers for, 2022, there was slightly more shochu and awamori produced in Japan in 2022 than tequila in Mexico.
Wow.
Now, in 2022, 68% of tequila, agave spirits, mezcal left Mexico, much of it coming to the States, of course, because the U.S. is the number one consumer of those products. Nearly 68%. 2022, same year, there's more shochu made. Less than 0.1% of that product ever left Japan. It's all consumed here. We keep all the good stuff to ourselves. And so this is just one of the biggest secrets of Japanese gustatory culture that's hiding in plain sight. And still, most people have never heard of it. And that's great. I mean, it's immense opportunity. And I love the chances to educate people on these and blow their minds.
Yeah.
But back in 2003, 2004, I'm thinking, well, how do I at least tell the people I know about this? So I would return home to Tokyo, and I started doing basically seminars and tasting classes at my friends' bars and restaurants. Mm-hmm. And it was great. It was a lot of fun. But one really weird thing started to happen. It went from being basically 99% non-Japanese as the paying guests at these things to 80 to 90% Japanese over a very short amount of time. I was attracting all sorts of folks who I thought already knew about this stuff, but actually, because they lived in Tokyo, they didn't, and they wanted to hear an outside perspective on it. So then that really forced me to work on my Japanese ability, because I was doing bilingual tasting seminars all of a sudden. Yeah. It was an eye-opener, but it also frustrated me, not because I didn't want to just preach to the choir, so to speak, but because I wanted to reach a more global audience. So I started working on the book. And that started around 2010. And it was an unforgiving process because there were no English language source materials that I could consult.
Didn't think about that. Wow.
So it was just constantly on the phone with people asking questions, often in the wrong language, and just getting what I could. And I finished the manuscript a few times and I trashed it. I hated it. And then after I got through the third one, I sort of had a revelation, and it was not great. I just realized, I'm just this kid, this American kid living in Japan, and who's going to read this book? Because I don't have any credentials. I'm just a nerd who is really passionate about this. So I went online and I figured out rather quickly, actually, I'm surprised I didn't know this. There was actually a Shochu Sam course that was available. And so I jumped into it, made a bunch of mistakes. I somehow forgot the fact that I don't read and write Japanese. So when I finally confronted the test, I realized I'm in big trouble. I'm not going to pass this. It's a written test with a tasting component, but that's only 1/4 of the test. So I ended up redoing the test via distance with a bunch of fat textbooks. In fact, I still have one of them. It's this bad boy, this green bad boy here that I went through character by character, looked everything up, and taught myself to read and write Japanese over the course of about 9 months. I finally passed it. And then I felt like I had the confidence to actually move on with the book. And so at first, after it was published, nobody cared. This was 2014. Now it's moving. Like, folks are actually paying attention. I'm glad that I was so far ahead of the curve. I mean, if there's a trend and you're chasing a trend, then obviously you're too late.
Yep.
I was way ahead of it. I was way too far ahead of it. I was generation before it, but I'm glad I did it. It was the culmination of me trying to do something positive for the industry. And now it's turned into something that is sort of a foundational piece for the outward genesis or whatever this is going to be. Fortunately, bartenders are turning to it.
This segment is sponsored by Beamlight Sauna Franchising. Are you looking to take control of your destiny and own your own business? Do you want a great brand in a rapidly growing market? Well, Beamlight Sauna is a nationwide health and wellness franchise with amazing opportunities in select markets. You can bring the power of infrared sauna and red light therapy to your community while you build a thriving business. Beamlight Sauna offers support that includes site selection, build out, even pre-launch programs and turnkey marketing, so you can open your studio with a large recurring revenue member base. To learn more about business ownership and franchise opportunities in the fast-growing health and wellness space, go to beamlightsauna.com. That's BEEM lightsauna.com and click on franchise opportunities to learn more. A couple last questions here. One, what has been, other than the regulations, other than you're having to go through this 3-tier system and all that in the States, but as an entrepreneur, speaking specifically as an entrepreneur, you just happen to specialize in Japanese spirits. What have you found to be your biggest challenge? What is the thing that seems to be like, damn, this is the hardest part of this?
There's so many hard parts, but I think one of the biggest challenges is, I mean, we're a B2B business essentially. Even though our goal is to be B2C, we can't legally be B2C. So many of my interactions are B2C, but I have to go through our distributor. I have to brainwash them. I have to inspire them and get them on my team to think about our products instead of the thousands of other products that their bosses are beating them to sell. And they're on quota for so many different things every month, every week. And then to go through them and make relationships with accounts, to inspire them to take a chance on something they've never heard of before and something that their consumers are unaware of, but that we are very confident. I know with all of my being, this is going to be a big thing. and we're helping you get in early. You're on the first floor before anybody else. And the challenge is juggling all of those, trying to funnel all of that energy in the right directions at the right times with a very limited amount of human resources and financial resources all across the United States as our starting point. That has been something that we struggle with on a day-to-day basis. It is very, very challenging. And if you know anything about the food and bev scene, folks move real fast and real often. So you may have generated this great rapport with not only the beverage manager at a specific restaurant, but maybe a good part of their team, and then they leave. And then two of their best servers leave. And then the bartender that was there for 6 years doesn't like the new person who came in, is going to be bossing them around. So he leaves. And all of a sudden you're back to zero. There's such a reset. There's so many resets with so many of these relationships so frequently. It can be, if you choose to allow it, it can be completely demoralizing because of the amount of time, effort, and financial resources you devote to developing these relationships. It's immensely humbling, and you're making the wrong decision so often, even though that decision worked somewhere else very, very well. It's such a tricky climate in which to try and build something that I don't know. I don't know the formula. Sure. I'm flying by the seat of my pants most of the time,
as we all are.
It's a learn as you go, and no matter how good you are, you're constantly learning as you're it's an on the job training constantly, and you gotta learn to thrive with that. You got to learn to laugh at it, because otherwise it's going to eat you up.
Christopher, I love that you slipped in there, and you just slipped it in there. You said, it can consume you, or it can wear you out, or it can defeat if you choose to let it, right? Like that was a really important phrase that you snuck in there, where a lot of newer entrepreneurs, they choose to allow a setback, a defeat, whatever, be the definition of their success, when it's just a stepping stone. It's a speed bump. Like this is a marathon. Let's keep going.
Correct.
But I love that you said that, if you choose to, because it's about how we perceive it. That's how we experience life, is how we choose to perceive it. So
110%.
A couple of last questions here. I ask most of my guests this: Is there a book? Can't choose your own. That's cheating. But is there a book that you've read? It could be on business, life. It could be, a Japanese text, American text, whatever, that you've read that really changed the way you looked at business, way you looked at relationships, life, whatever, that you would love to recommend to the listeners that could help them grow and them, expand their world.
Oh, I can grab it right now.
Sure.
And I want to say that the title of this book sounds very poppy and very trendy, but it's way deeper than that. And I would encourage anyone who has a chance to pick this up to do so with an open mind. It is a phenomenal read, and it's called Influence is Your Superpower by Zoe Chance.
Okay.
And this professor essentially did was take a course that she's been teaching at a very reputable university for a long time and condense it into book form. And she gets into the psychology of decision making. And there's so much in here that is useful we all are trying to create a better life for ourselves. And that involves interacting with other people. That involves your ability to influence the situation. And her thesis is that you can harness your ability to influence people without being a dick. Yeah. That's not required. You don't have to be an animal. You can actually affect the world in positive ways if you just recognize the powers that you were born with and you actually can hone over time.
Yep.
And so I was very I've read this book twice now, and I've taken something new from it both times. Highly recommend it. It's such an easy read. Lots of case studies and examples.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes for people to click right on. Thank you for that. There's a guy named Robert Cialdini, professor out of Arizona State University, that just writes amazing stuff on persuasion, influence, and you're right. Persuasion is not manipulation. It's helping somebody make a decision that they want to make. They just haven't found the right path in their head to make that decision, and that's all. That's all we're doing is helping them. This one's a little bit different. So. Not to be morbid, but let's say Christopher, we go to the end of your life and you've lived this long, beautiful, amazing life, world traveled, world resident. But we're at the end, whatever decade that happens to be. And a loved one is reading your eulogy, and he or she only is allowed to choose 3 words, 3 descriptors of the life that you lived, the impact you made on the world, the impact you made on them. What 3 words, it doesn't have to make a phrase, but just what 3 words do you hope they choose that you would be proud that they said at your funeral, in your eulogy?
I hope they would say that I cared, not only about what I'm doing, but about people, because I'm very much about my friends, my family, and I give people the benefit of the doubt without fail. I hope they also would say that I was self-aware and that I haven't always been that way, but I try to be that way. And that I evolved. I learned. I didn't like what I saw sometimes in myself, and I figured out a way to do it a little bit differently. Maybe not always better, but I evolved. Yeah. And if that is part of the story, whatever my eulogy happens to be, at least if people realize that I cared, I looked in the mirror, I changed, then I would be very proud of that.
Super cool. Love it. You should be. And then second to last question, and you've lived in different parts of the world. World's a little crazy right now. Certainly a little wacky in America, going into election. It's a little scary in the Middle East. It's a lot of things happening. If you could wave a magic wand tonight, if I give you this magic wand, and Christopher can wave this magic wand tonight, and we wake up in the morning and the world is different in one material way. You've changed the way people are, the way the world is, a state of an issue in the world, whatever that may be. You wave that magic wand tonight. We wake up. How is it different according to you?
Oh, wow. Okay. That's a great question, but I got to whittle it down to one. Man, I wish that, and this is going to sound dumb. So I apologize because this is a little bit ultra idealistic. I wish that it was required, and maybe it should just be born into people, that they have lived in different cultural contexts, been the other, been the down and out, been the unfavorable for a good portion of their life, so that you learn what it feels like, and you develop compassion, and you root for the underdog, and you enter new situations with a whole set of tools that you can only get through that experience, quite honestly. Yeah. And I wish that was, if it's not programmed into people. I was very lucky to be a part of a university program when I was, at the university at Waseda, called the School of International Studies. And they required every single student to spend 1 year studying abroad before they could graduate. Didn't matter where you went, but you had to go somewhere. And I thought that was so cool, because all of these students came back. They went from being 19-year-old, just kids who, some of them still lived at home, to just like, oh, you've seen some stuff. This is good. Yeah. This is good. And it's going to take a while to gestate and kind of macerate in your being. Yeah. but you took some important stuff from that, and it's going to, it's going to elaborate the number of filters that you can place over your perception as you walk through life. Yeah. I wish everybody had that experience. And if I could wave a magic wand, then people would be born with it.
Yeah. Great answer. Most important question. How do people follow you, be part of your journey as you're going on this undertaking this massive challenge? And then I guess second part of that question is, how can they find your products? How can they find your products in, somewhat in their local area?
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. My name is Christopher Pellegrini, and you can basically plug those words into a lot of social media and you'll find me. I'm particularly active currently on Instagram and Facebook. Okay. I know I should be on TikTok and Snapchat. I'm learning, I'm studying, I'm trying to figure out the culture there. I'm dating myself. I just don't quite trust it yet. I don't really trust myself to be involved in that yet.
We're on the same. We're on the same. Yeah.
I'll get there. Yeah. I need a little more help with it, but and then I do have a personal website called ChristopherPellegrini.com, which is essentially designed to be a place where I can write short posts about what Shochu and Awamori are in, the most cut and dried terms that I can think of. My business is it's a very, very good team. Honkaku is the name of the US business, and it has a lot of information about Japanese traditional spirits and our products in particular. You can actually order many of our products from the website if you're in the United States. And I apologize to folks elsewhere in the world. We are a tiny company and we haven't figured out that many markets yet. If you happen to be in Japan, you can also order some of our products, but those are the only two markets at this time. Yeah. And that's it. I'm very easy to track down. If you have questions, I have people randomly from other parts of the world just sending me photos through Instagram of a shochu menu in Berlin and in, Miami. And they're like, what should I get? And if I'm paying attention to my phone, I'm going to answer. Yeah, I will tell you exactly what to get and how to drink it. And I'm saying this, there's great risk here, but I actually want you to enjoy these drinks where you are in your own way. I will give my 2 cents. You figure it out, work with the bartenders, see what they think, and we can make this happen. But I think, if there's anything, and it comes down to it's as simple as ordering from a menu. And my whole life is designed around this very premise. Jump first, ask questions later. Just try it. You know what I mean? And that's my entire existence is I don't overthink it. I'm like, yeah, that sounds really cool. Let's try it. And you never know what can happen because a lot of times magic can ensue.
There's an entrepreneurial lesson in what you just said right there too. Just jump. We'll figure it out.
Don't ask for permission. Just Yep. That's half of it.
We'll put your website, the company website, all that in the show notes so people can just scroll right down and click that. I want to just really take a moment and just tell you how grateful I am that you came on. I know that it's 11 a.m. here in the States where I'm at, but it's 1 a.m. in Japan. And I really appreciate you staying up late to do this podcast. And thank you for coming on. Your presence is amazing.
True pleasure, Roger. Thank you so much for allowing me to come on. Thank you so much to your guests, your audience. Mm-hmm. If you have any, I hope I can visit here again. So much more to talk about, especially where business is concerned, not necessarily about the products themselves, but like just doing something crazy. I would love to talk about that more.
We'll, as you build your business, because it's fun to always follow and come back a year later or 2 years later and say, okay, now here's where we're at. And for sure, you can count on that. Yeah, for sure.
Cheers, man.
Thank you for tuning in to the ThriveMore podcast. Don't forget to take a look at the show notes for any of the resources that we mentioned during the podcast. And if you haven't already, be be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you have access to the latest and the greatest. You can connect with me on any of the socials at Real Roger Martin, and be sure to check out our website, ThriveMoreBrands.com. There you'll find information on the brands we support and information on franchising. Thanks again for tuning in.